Outrageous act, especially the time and the climate and the cultural climate it was back then.
No kidding. Now, the Greensboro Four never expected to get food at that segregated lunch counter in this building behind us, but what they did hope to do was to change a custom and perhaps start a grassroots effort.
As Fox 8 Sheikah Strickland reports, it all started with 4 young, brave men walking into this department store.
On the afternoon of February 1, 1960, the Greensboro Four walked into the Woolworth store in teams of 2. Joseph McNeil and Franklin McCain first, then Jabril Kazan and David Richmond. They had a carefully thought out plan and a number of emotions.
We walked through that door, I was nervous. Joseph McNeil, he's probably much more sure than I was.
A sense of pride, because we sensed we were doing something that was certainly important to us.
Franklin McCain said, I wasn't scared at all.
I was too angry to be afraid.
David Richmond was cool. He was always silent, but David Richmond was the warrior.
Anxiety? Yes, and the anxiety was about the unknown. There were 2 things, there were 2 possibilities on February 1st for me. I knew that when we walked downtown, one of 2 things would happen to Franklin McCain. First of all, I knew my days as a student were going to be over. I knew that. If I were lucky, I would go to jail for a long, long time. If I were not quite so lucky, I would come back to my campus in a pan box.
The students walked with that anxiousness to a merchandise counter and bought school supplies. Franklin McCain says they wandered around the store for another 3 minutes, which felt more like 45.
And I looked at Joseph McNeil, and he looked at me without saying a word. And we looked at the counter. And we strode to that counter and took a seat.
Maybe we were a little crazy, because maybe doing something at that time, you had to be a little crazy to do that.
When we sat at the lunch counter, we sat down slowly.
McCain says just 20 seconds after he sat on that lunch counter stool, the most amazing feeling swept over him.
I had a feeling of self-fulfillment. I had a feeling of dignity 100 feet tall. I had a feeling of invincibility. I was somebody through my own accord and through my own action. Quite honestly, I wouldn't have felt cheated if I had died at that counter at that very instant.
Down a few seats, Jabril Kazan says he was still questioning what they were doing.
What am I doing sitting here at this lunch counter? Am I gonna get killed? Is the police gonna beat the hell out of me?
Kazan says these doubts were stronger for David Richmond and him because they were from Greensboro. Their families were here. What they were doing wasn't just a risk for them, but the livelihoods of their loved ones in Greensboro. On the other side of the counter, the Woolworth staff seemed to have questions too.
I think the waitress and the counter people were so perplexed and so surprised. They tried to ignore us. I mean, they're not, no, they can't be sitting there. They're not sitting there. I can't believe what I'm seeing.
After a few minutes, the ANT4 asked for service. Waitresses told them they'd have to follow local custom and go to the Negro counter in the back of the store where they'd wait and eat standing up. The 4 politely objected and asked again to be served where they were sitting.
They told us they weren't going to serve us. They warned us we were going to get in a lot of trouble. They warned us a policeman was coming.
McCain says that's when he noticed an old white woman a few seats to his left eyeing them.
And she turned around with some deliberation, pulled out this big handbag, and she strode towards us. I was nearest her. And she put a fixation with her eyes on me that could have cut me into 50 pieces. And she walked slowly over toward me.
McCain says he feared what this woman was going to do, and he knew it couldn't be good. That's when she put one hand on McCain's shoulder and the other hand on McNeil's.
And she said in the calmest voice, "Boys, I am so proud of you. I only regret that you didn't do this 10 years earlier."
In that moment, McCain says he learned a lifelong lesson. Never stereotype anyone, but give them the same chance you would want for yourself.
And that was like a shot of adrenaline. That was our first victory in a sense.
But 10 minutes later, the A&T students had another visitor, a police officer pacing behind the teenagers. He was more threatening, whacking a nightstick in his hands.
And after he turned as red as the bottom of that chair and continued to pace, the thought occurred to me, aha, we've got him, we've got him. He doesn't know what to do. And he didn't. And I felt singularly powerful.
McCain says shortly after, the store manager decided to close the Woolworth store early. The Greensboro Four left a few minutes before the store closed so they wouldn't get caught in any trouble with the police or the crowd that had now gathered around the store. The four men walked back to campus
in a sense of pride for having done something.
We were thinking about people respecting people.
Amazed at the outcome of their public protest.
I felt a real moral victory. And I felt that I'm certain now that we're going to win.
Of course, as we look back at the events of how we got here, we're also looking at the events and celebrating today, the opening of the